Today, I'm joined by Steve Smith. We are going to be talking about safety science. I'm going to get straight to it. One person said to me, skip the fluff, great, get straight to the stuff. And I kind of like that messaging. So we're going to get straight there. I'm going to ask a kind of like massive question, and I'm going to ask you to maybe give me the basic version for people who are maybe entering into this world new. How would you describe safety science? What's your definition for it?
Well, thanks for having me here, Phil. And that's a great opening question. Safety science it's a social science, and it's basically using scientific methods and research to improve safety management in different industries. I have a recent book that applies these concepts to the outdoor and experiential education industry, but safety science is much broader, and it's tapping into lessons learned really from the last century of safety management. Let's go back to the Industrial Revolution and work our way forward to today through some of those different eras and the different events that occurred and things that we learned and how strategies changed. When a space shuttle blows up, what do we learn from that? Or when a nuclear power plant melts down or almost melts down, what do we learn from that? And on up into the present day with, let's take, for example, what's going on at Boeing right now. What can we learn from those events? We're tapping into lessons learned from these much larger industries who honestly have a lot more money and resources than the organizations that I tend to work with. And we're harvesting the learning from those big organizations and bring them back to summer camps and schools and outdoor programs and nonprofits so that they can apply the lessons from safety science to their outfits. And it's really rich and full of interesting ways to apply the lessons learned.
It's interesting, like even the way that you're describing in a way of optimism and joy. I can sense that from the tone. And yet the issues that you're researching or going to study would be probably tragic or potentially morbid. And I think sometimes that dichotomy of the morbidity and the risk and then the positivity and optimism that you're suggesting, I feel is something that isn't talked about potentially enough. Like I interact in the challenge course world where at a level 2 level of training, I often ask questions about near misses and accidents and incident reports and how well are we actually logging that data. And my guess is it's not as well as we maybe should. Where do you draw that positivity and hopefulness from a potentially sad experience?
Well, you have really gone directly to a really crucial distinction. And I want to just reframe it a bit if I could.
Yeah.
One of the big lessons learned in safety science is that we should not just be looking at the things that have gone wrong. There is an approach to safety management that, for the longest time, a sort of traditional top down approach that has basically told us that we need to find out what has gone wrong and study it with a microscope so that we can do safety better. Here's a metaphor. If you want to understand happy marriages, are you only going to look at cases that end in divorce? Or could we perhaps look at the situations where people are in fact safe and study that? So there is a much broader set of data to be found if we look at understanding why things normally go well in our programs rather than just focusing on you don't have enough critical incidents in your organization to learn much from them. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Right?
No.
So all we're doing is studying what has gone wrong. We're kind of doing it the old way. And
Mm.
the reason you get this positivity from me is that it is a much more positive approach to safety. Of course, we need to study the incidents and the accidents and the near misses to learn from them. But if we stop there, we're really just looking at this little pool of information. If we broaden that, and we ask ourselves, like, let's say a group comes back successfully from a trip and they're all, milling about in the trailhead or at the parking lot waiting to wrap up the day and leave. We could pause and we could ask, were we lucky or were we good today? Even in these successful trips, there's a lot that we can learn and do better and continuously improve. So we don't have to wait for the tragedy to occur to learn. We can learn all the time. We can learn every day. We can ask better questions. We can reframe our definition of safety management, not as the avoidance of incidents, but as the pursuit of our mission, of our outcomes, of the beneficial risks that we have founded our programs to be about. So it really, you get the positivity from it because it's a more positive approach to safety management, and I think it
Yeah.
fits the outdoor and experiential education industry in a really, really captivating way and it doesn't necessarily fit with industrial manufacturing or oil and gas or, I don't know, you name it, hospital work. There's something about this safety science approach that I think really naturally fits with our industry in ways that we're just beginning to learn about. So it is a more positive approach, and you nailed that.
And I like it because on the cover of the book, it references "Were we lucky or were we good today?" or something around that line, which I think is leaning into that like positive leaning. It feels like, to be honest, as human beings, we so heavily focus on the negative. I was just at a conference workshop and I was talking to some people who had just got evals from their workshops, and they were like immediately highlighting the one where they didn't get a good evaluation. It's like all the rest were good, but we've drawn in on the negative. And I think potentially in our industry, for the outside world, maybe the word risk and the word safety indicates a negative outcome or a
Mhm.
protection of a negative,
Yeah.
rather than reinforcing the positive outcome, which is on a more regular day-to-day basis of when things have gone well. Is that something you've interacted with, and maybe this is a draw for you to try to reframe?
Yeah, again, I feel like you've already read the book. I think you're asking really insightful observations here, and if we frame our risk management decision makings through the lens of loss, what is it that we have to lose? We're going to be approaching things from a certain mindset. And I think that that is not always the best mindset that's going to set us up to make the best strategic decisions. If we frame that through the lens of what might we have to gain and structuring and designing the programs in order to pursue we can't eliminate all the risk from these programs, even if that was a good idea. We couldn't do it, right? So we could never get to that place where risk has been eliminated. So if we can flip that around and think about it in terms of pursuing the benefits of risk and understanding things through these different lenses, I think it really does take us in a broad direction. I think I can anticipate some folks, hearing that and wondering about what about, tragedies that have occurred and what about terrible things that can happen. And of course, that's the other side of the risk coin, is that we need to be prepared to respond when things don't go as planned. Even in the best programs that I've been involved with, things can sometimes go very wrong. And when that happens, again, safety science is going to help us find a more humane way to approach those situations and to learn from that instead of just settling for a simple story of blame or acting like the event has been resolved and now we need to carry on with our programs. No, there's secondary victims. There's learning that needs to be harvested from this event. We need to build on these events and positively learn from those too. And so in all these different ways, the safety science approach centers humans and people at the forefront. And we believe that by doing that, in so doing, you are actually taking care of the organization as well. So
How do you explain to someone to reframe, like, if I'm thinking I'm going to fill out accident incident reports, near misses, all those things that we're typically filling in. Are you having people fill out counter forms? Like what's the flip to that to say like, oh, you had a great day? Because I don't think we highlight enough of those. Like you just say it was a good day, you move on. But there's no evaluation on a good day. There tends to be a lot of evaluation on a bad day. Is there a reframe that like your clients have to do?
that's a wonderful question. I think that first of all, it's not all about just the forms, right? I think there is a lot of continuous learning and growth that can occur whether a form is filled out or not, right? So I think first and foremost, I think would be understanding the intent of processing and debriefing and documenting, which is learning instead of settling for some simple story of blame or a simple linear view that, oh, this happened. And so we just need a linear solution to that one thing. We're going to make a new policy that you're not allowed to cut onions with a knife in this particular campsite anymore. Like that might, on the surface, it might fix what appeared to be the proximal cause of that event, but it obviously, it obviously doesn't get at all of the combinations of things that had to occur for that event even to be possible. So we can't go back and fix things in this simple linear way by just adding more and more and more policies. That doesn't make us safer. So instead, if our goal is learning instead of fixing and blaming, if it's about understanding and learning, then that can happen through debriefing. I love that. Were we lucky or were we good question? Because it
Mm.
is a safe way to enter into a conversation for us to be learning, even from the successful trips, right? Even from the ones that went well. And we don't have to wait for something to go wrong to learn from it. So if we're debriefing and having a consistent approach to that and really hearing from all the voices, then that's going to create, continuous learning and improvement, whether we fill out a form or not. So that's the first thing. In terms of incident reporting and forms, the way that they've historically been designed really is built on this premise that we should just be understanding what went wrong and try to do less of it. They rarely ask what went well. They rarely ask what things weren't in place that made it, although the event happened, it wasn't as harmful as it could have been because something worked as intended. What was
Mm.
that? Was that equipment? Was it training? Was it intervention? Was it luck? Sometimes that's a factor. So, we should, when we're sharing incidents and trying to learn from them, we really need to be understanding the context in which the event happened so that in the end, we are not just fixing the worker, we're fixing the workplace. We're fixing the conditions that made the event possible. When a bad event happens, let's say you fire that person, someone in your ropes course has made a real mistake and you fire that person. Maybe it was a mistake that anyone could have made, and it happened to be this person. What we've done is we've removed the one person from your program that most likely learned from that event and could keep it from happening again. Right.
Yeah.
So, I think that there is a really kind of a old traditional top down approach to risk management that is about fixing and blaming and simple stories and linear views of incidents. And if we expand our approach, then I think we can really get to a place where we're continuously improving all the time and making a safe space for people to speak up when they have a safety concern, maybe before the event happens, things like this. So,
Yeah. That
old view, it's clearly time that we can't just keep doing the old view and doing it harder. We need to maybe expand our view and try different things.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's been a lot of conversations I've had on this podcast, which have been
Mhm.
critically looking at things that have been done in the past and saying, what can somewhat shift? I reference many times that someone said to me that the critic is the greatest optimist because a
Mm.
critic is actually someone who cares. If you critique something, you care about this being better. And it's someone who's apathetic is the problem. Like you don't want someone who can care less. So you want people to care. So critiquing it is fine. And almost what you're suggesting is a proactive versus a reactive approach, right? Rather than looking at stuff and reacting and saying like, oh, when something goes wrong, this is what we do. Rather saying like, what has right in the past and how can we move this forward? And maybe it means changing some practices. We talk about that a lot about how do we set people up to climb? And do we have to do the same things we've done all the time? Or can we start to change up the process by which we model struggle? So when struggle occurs, we can address it.
Mm.
And so seems like this is really something that you're also talking about. I'd love to, you'd referenced prior to this Me Present Record, you'd referenced there was a shift in you, or at least in the way that you wrote the first book that you'd written, Beneficial Risks, and then this book. I wonder if you'd mind getting into that. Like, what was the difference between the two books from your writing, and what have you learned between those two? Because this was written in 2021. You're into this next one.
Yeah, I started writing the second one almost immediately when the first one was done. And let me say about the first book, Beneficial Risks, it's really quite different because it was me pulling together voices from a tremendous, remarkable group of collaborators, many of whom were and are my mentors and heroes in this outdoor risk management space. So that book was my attempt to aggregate and synthesize the lessons learned from the last, let's say, 30 years or so of what you might think of as the outdoor and experiential education, wilderness risk management community. And I was trying to take the best thinkers from our industry and to weave together their thoughts in this coherent story. This second book was very much the opposite of me looking outside of the wilderness risk management and outdoor experiential community and trying to learn from the leading thinkers and the best minds in the research, many of whom are no longer with us because this goes back a century or more. But it was my attempt to distill the best thinking and research of the evolution of how safety management has changed in the larger occupational safety world, and then to translate that back into case studies and examples, some of which are real and some of which are hypothetical stories that illustrate these evolution in how we think about safety management in those different eras. And kind of contrasting, I was kind of alluding earlier to contrasting the old view or the traditional safety management approach, which is sort of, it's basically looking at what has gone wrong and trying to do less of it. And I think the really uplifting new view of safety management, which asks a different question, of why do things normally go right? And how do we do more of that? And can we learn from everyday work instead of waiting for some tragedy to occur and then react to it? So it's shifting from a sort of mechanistic approach to safety management to more of a humanistic approach. It's asking, very different questions. An old approach might be like, what rule did they break? How bad was the breach? What should the punishment be? And the new approach might ask, who has been hurt and what do they need? And whose job is it to meet that need? And so you can feel like those questions lead us to such different places. And
Yeah.
one is about blame, and one is about learning. One is about a linear, simple story. The other is more about a complex story that we might humbly admit that we don't completely understand, but that we want to ask enough people in our organization until we can get a better understanding. And instead of telling people what to do to be safe, we want to ask them what they need to be safe. Right? You can feel how different that is.
Yeah.
So to sum it up, the second book, it really felt like my own PhD, it felt like my own dissertation in studying this complex body of work, learning from some really wonderful people who have done amazing research, and just translating that story back for the outdoor and experiential education community. And the other thing that I did differently in the second book is I got a single illustrator. The smartest move I made was to get a single illustrator. It was this wonderful illustrator, Margot Stoney, and she did a beautiful job of taking all these models and concepts and having a consistent look and feel throughout the entire book. And it does feel like I'm really proud that I wrote that first book, but I'm really proud of how I wrote the second book in that
Mm.
it's craftsmanship. It feels like the kind of consistent vision, that I had at the outset that I was able to pull together.
I
Yeah.
wonder if it's like I was having a conversation at a conference around imposter syndrome, and I don't know
Mm,
if this applies, but the way I think about it is your first book is a celebration of other people.
mm.
It's like an interesting way to write a book in terms of like I'm going to honor those people, and then the second one maybe is a little bit more about yourself, also adding your own voice. So there's some more you in it, which brings with it greater risk, but it maybe centers around that a little bit more. Maybe that's why you have more pride, or at least feeling the pride in your second book, than the cultivation of other people's voices. It's like, all right, distilled my voices into this.
I like that, Phil. I think that's a good analogy. And the last chapter of the first book is basically a preview of the entire second book, which is this
Yeah.
evolution of risk management. In the last chapter of beneficial risks, I start to hint at this larger set of ways of thinking about risk management that is bigger than what we've done in the outdoor community. And that is when you could feel me starting to get excited about that stuff back then. And right in the middle of the pandemic is a great time to release a book, apparently. That's what I did. And I was really fortunate to have Sydney Decker, who is one of my real heroes and kind of someone whose work I've really followed and learned so much from, write the foreword to that first book, and then very
Mm.
kindly for the second book as well. So he's just been a tremendously supportive person who is a best-selling author and a real leader in safety science. And I have no idea why he's been so kind and supportive and generous to me, but he really has. And I'm just grateful for all of the support, as well as the support I've gotten from this safety science community that has been very welcoming and, yeah, taken me in and, really helped me to adapt and interpret a lot of their work for our community.
I wanna ask it like I don't know if this is a challenging question, but I'm just thinking in myself of the two. We've got the stuff of the
Mm.
past. We've got like compliance-based safety protocols that are maybe easy to follow. You've got learning and adaptability, which and the way I'm kind of thinking about it myself is like the hardest people I often find to teach facilitation or experiential education to are public school teachers. And the reason is because they're really constrained, and the idea of adaptability and flexibility can be really taxing. Can you imagine, or have you considered like the idea that a learning and adaptability approach to risk management or safety might be harder than the compliance? And how do you maybe combat that like challenge of like I'm creating a thing that's going to be harder for people to adapt to than giving them a sheet to fill in?
Mhm. No, I think it's a really good question, and I think your question pinpoints an important piece in which context really matters, right? And the context in which someone is doing their work really does drive them to different things being harder or easier. So, someone operating in a very bureaucratic school system or a big corporate structure or environment, if they're trying to do so if we think about this as safety one, the old school, and safety two, which is the new and sort of new view of safety. If we think about it, it's probably, unless we've done something to replace safety one, that's probably going to be the default prevailing approach that a lot of would be normal in society and organizations, and the way that OSHA and safety compliance, mechanisms like that have led us, and the way that investigations and bureaucracy works. We're safety one foundationally, right? And unless you've done something to change that, the context in which your organization is operating is really going to make that harder or easier for you to achieve. So, my question would be not just focusing on the person, but focusing on the organization itself. Do they think people are the cause of their safety problems, or do they think people are solutions to their safety problems? And if we can
Mm.
get the leadership to begin to wrap their heads around their foundational assumptions, we can be so entrenched in our safety one beliefs that we don't even know we're in the trench. We don't see it as a trench. It's just normal for us. And once you get up out of the trench and you have seen this sort of refreshing human base, I think, more contemporary, progressive way of thinking about safety management, light bulbs tend to go on. And it's hard for people to sort of disagree with it in principle. Now, of course, it's easy to disagree with it when something has gone wrong and people are in a tragic situation or there's time pressure. Or often people will agree with this stuff in principle. And then when it's tested, you
Mm.
can revert back to your top down traditional patriarchal safety one beliefs. So I think your question is really interesting. And I will say that the outdoor and experiential education community is more attuned to and likely to be receptive to these views than a lot of industries would be. Ones that might be more driven by profit or efficiency, or squeezing every dollar they can out of the workers, or really operating on a razor thin margin of productivity driven by some board, that you could imagine sort of an approach that doesn't center humans and doesn't believe in asking people what they need, because what if they tell us? What's that going to cost, right? So you can imagine some workplaces and industries, being more conducive than others to this approach. But I have found every single organization that we've brought this to, and I've been working with it for more than 5 years before the book came out, right? Doing this with different organizations. And it's very uplifting. It's very positive. It's very well received. It can be really empowering. And the people that love it the most are the frontline workers who finally have a voice and who finally have a role to play in their own safety management in ways that the old top down approach doesn't leave room for. So I found it to be a really natural fit for our industry, and that it doesn't change quickly. And to be clear, one last little point here is we're not talking about pitting safety one against safety too. It's not one or the other. You have to do both. We're never going to get away from safety one. That's not going anywhere, right? There are rules, there are regulations, there's laws, there's policies, there's procedures. All that stuff is good. All that stuff has helped us get to a certain point, and that has helped us move along. If we stop there, then we're never going to evolve. And how's that working for us? It's obviously imperfect. Safety one is not enough, right? So safety two is a way to build on top of that foundation of safety one, and to not just ask people, not just tell people what to do, but to ask them, what do you need? And to not just settle for simple stories, but to also look for the more complex stories of, what were the things happening in this workplace that made that event possible to begin with? And if we fire Timmy for this thing, are we removing the one person who most likely would keep us from having that same event again? So getting out of that blame cycle and into more of a what a occupational safety psychologist Clive Lloyd has called the trust loop, which is a virtuous cycle where people can feel psychologically safe. They can speak up when they can have concerns. As a result, things get fixed. People are less likely to make mistakes, and the virtuous cycle of trust, doesn't just help the people, it helps the organization itself. It's hard to argue with it once you see it.
Yeah. And it's also, you're encouraging people to talk about a topic more. If you have this topic that is essentially taboo, you don't ever bring up, no one's going to want to fill out a form anyway, because they're going to feel like they're Timmy and going to lose their job. So how do we normalize the conversation of safety and risk in a way that's more positively learning focused than it is maybe performative to a certain degree? Because I sometimes feel like some of the actions become performative, like, oh, I'm just doing this. Like, certifications in some areas might feel like, oh, I'm just checking a box. But then you
Mhm.
go back, like, why are we doing it? That's the root, like, why? So it's almost like you've gone back to the why instead of the what. And that sort of changes the mindset for people and becomes less of a top down approach if we just get to talk about things that went well.
Yeah. There's a concept in some of the safety research that I've been doing about, organizations that are paper safe, meaning that they fill out all the forms, they look good on paper, they've done all the risk assessments, they've buttoned things up. And in a way, what they've done is they've used these devices that are meant to actually manage risk. And they've used them to justify decisions that they've already made as a business to move forward with this program, or to go ahead, or to, do the trip, or whatever it might be. And those are not helping us manage risk. They are actually just giving us ways, after something has gone wrong, to go back and blame someone for filling the form out wrong, or not filling it out to begin with, or, maybe justifying in a court of law that, well, we did everything we were supposed to do. But, managing liability is actually not the same as managing safety. They're different things. And in fact, when we over focus on liability avoidance, that can sometimes make us less safe. And I've got some stories in the book about that. But paper safe is not a good, that's a very safety one. That's a very top down, traditional paperwork based approach to safety, instead of an actual human operational approach to safety. And filling out the form it's not a bad thing to do, but it doesn't guarantee that we're safe.
There's
Right.
as you're talking, in my head, I'm giggling because of two things. The idea of safety one and safety two being descriptive terms, and I can think of some safety one people in my lives. So like, oh, they're a safety one. But then also you referenced Timmy. So funny that you pulled out the name Timmy. Anyone who comes to one of our trainings may hear me talk about the story of Timmy Two Drops. He was an unfortunate human being who was in a training who dropped some hardware from up height twice. So
Mm.
I didn't give him that name, by the way. I just want to put that out there. But he got the unfortunate name Timmy Two Drops. So I'm not sure what we learned from Timmy Two Drops, but that just makes me laugh whenever I hear the word Timmy and it relates to anything safety related. Last question I have on this, and then I open up to where maybe people can find more about you. But if people were to pick up the book, they read it over a weekend,
Yeah.
they wake up on Monday. What do you hope that they're doing Monday morning that they maybe weren't doing Friday afternoon?
I think one of the biggest takeaways from the book is that we can either learn or we can blame, but we can't do both. So you have to take your pick. Which one do you want to be? And that the systems and the structures and the history and the historical things in our society and in your organization that drive us towards blame are things that need to be actively dismantled and recognized and changed and redirected so that learning is even possible. And there might be some folks who would want to argue that we can learn and blame. And I think what they're doing is that they're confusing blame and accountability. And I think they're different things. So the book goes into all that as well. But I definitely think that that would be a big takeaway, that I would hope someone will walk away with, is this idea that we need to revisit our systems and our approach so that we are striving for continuous improvement and learning every day instead of just waiting for the tragedy to occur and then sidestepping it by blaming someone for what might have been a system induced problem to begin with. So there's a quick little soundbite about
Yeah.
a takeaway from the book.
I love it, like learn or blame.
Yeah.
So I'm going to choose in this moment to blame you for a great conversation. That felt so perfect that I could do that. But what if people want to learn more? I know as well there's an online course that you're running along coinciding with the book. Where can people find information about that? And what are the offerings around that virtual workshop?
Thank you. Thank you. So my company is called Experiential Consulting, and it's not just my company. We have a remarkable team of folks here. And at the Experiential Consulting website, outdoorrisk.com. Can't believe I got that, by the way. Like, that was available. So,
Wow.
outdoorrisk.com, 2 R's, outdoorrisk.com. There's a whole page on there about the book as well as the safety science classes that we're offering. It's a 6-week program that correlates with the different sections and chapters of the book. And in addition to the class and the book, there's also an entire online learning platform that we've built with activities and podcasts and videos and ways to collaborate with your cohort of folks also in the class, which is called the Experiential Consulting Community, is the name of the learning platform. So check out the EC learning community and the safety science book on our website. We also have built an online class for the beneficial risks book as well, Phil, which wasn't a big focus of our podcast here today, but that's another one that we're offering as well now. So it's a fun new way for us to engage with folks who might not want to have a consultation or fly us in, to come and work with them on the ground on their program, but it is a way to engage with us and to enhance your learning from these 2 books. So it's really fun. I was a classroom teacher before I became a mountaineering instructor and an outdoor educator and a risk manager. So it's giving me a chance to get back to my classroom teaching roots in a really, fun way. I'm not getting any younger, so it's fun for me to have a chance to do this. And speaking of not getting any younger, today's my birthday, by the way. So I'm choosing to spend it with you, Phil, just like I always do every year.
Wow, that's an incredible. We'll have to make this a yearly thing. That now you just spend the time talking to me for half an hour. Well, thank you for choosing. You had the choice of the day, and you chose this day. I want to put it out there and then force him to work on his birthday. But thank you for this, Steve. This has been really enlightening. A complete reframe. To be honest, even for me coming into this, the positivity and the optimism was something, as I was prepping myself for this, wasn't necessarily where I anticipated us going. And I appreciate you for bringing that into this. And I hope that people listening are also feeling that same way. And check out all the links that I'm going to throw in the description to find out more about Steve. So thank you, Steve.
Thanks so much, Phil. Really enjoyed it.